Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we are going to be taking a look into the company Alcon's service overhaul and what comes next. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today Kenny Brown, who is the Senior Director of Global Surgical and Vision Care Franchise Business Technology at Alcon. Kenny, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I nailed that, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
We were just saying it's a long title, and I said I mess them up plenty. So
the most
um
words in a title, I think, in the history.
yeah, I hope you when you you hope you don't have to type that out too much because that's
Yeah,
a lot of typing. Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here, Kenny. Before we get into taking a look at the service overhaul and talking about, what happens after something as um significant as the overhaul that Alcon has been through. Just tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, your role, and what Alcon does.
yeah, sure, Sarah. So I like if someone's going to ask me in an elevator what my role is, I'll say I'm a senior director of business technology. I've been with Alcon for 20 years. I started as a contractor, actually. To date myself, I helped upgrade Windows NT to Windows XP 21 years ago here at Alcon. So
Excellent.
very technical role, getting my foot in the door, and I've grown up in the Alcon family, and it's been my career, right, is majority of it has been here in a various different roles. I actually started as a full-time role in the R&D group in IT, doing development and then application development and application ownership, project management. I went into operational excellence, which is more of the group inside of Alcon that trained on Lean Six Sigma principles and
Mhm.
coaching and certifying groups with green belt and black belt certifications and teaching the organization how to do problem solving through Lean Six Sigma. I went into the global service organization, and I'll speak a little bit more about that along my journey. But the global service organization is really focused on the technical service engineers, as well as our clinical application specialists. In the medical device companies such as Alcon, we train surgeons and their staff how to use advanced technologies, and I worked with them quite often in a global role to implement operational excellence into their practices.
Mhm.
And then currently, I lead the franchise business technology team. So that role entails driving digital transformation
Mhm.
and bringing innovative technology to support our business goals. So that's really the single point of contact between business and our IT organization to bring that to life.
Yeah.
Alcon's a global leader in eye care, Sarah. So we've been around for 75 years. We're the largest eye care company in the world, with strong businesses both in surgical and vision care.
Mhm.
Surgical meaning more of the OR and the clinic, and thinking of that from a surgery perspective, and vision care meaning more of the contact lenses over the counter area. And now getting into the pharma space. We were in the pharma space, getting back into that now. And we operate in 60 countries. We serve patients in over 140 countries. And we're committed to innovation at Alcon.
Mhm.
So we put a lot of investment in R&D into our pipeline and to make sure that our customers and patients are getting the products and the services that they need. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's a little bit about Alcon, a little bit about myself. Worked in a lot of different departments, and really excited about my current role, which is really bringing technology innovation and into our strategy and making it real value for our customers.
Yeah, I love that. You and I were chatting about, I think I made the comment to you that, when someone has been with a company for 20 plus years, particularly today, right? It makes me think like, wow, that must be a pretty good culture, a pretty good experience, right? Because the reality is, there's plenty of opportunity to go elsewhere if that wasn't the case.
Sure.
The other thing that is, I think, really great is the fact that you've had the opportunity to work across so many functions of the business. And when we talk about this service overhaul, when you're leading a real significant transformation, there's so much good that comes from having those different perspectives, not just listening to those different perspectives, but having lived them and really having sort of a firsthand, idea of, okay, I know what this function is up against, or I know what
Yeah.
some of the challenges are going to be. There's a lot that can be helpful about kind of being able to lead a transformation, but look through the lens of,
Yeah.
all of those roles that you've been in previously.
Absolutely. It's definitely an enabler to
Hmm.
my success now and in a lot of previous roles. And I feel like every time I go into a role and come out of that role, I'm stronger and can enable Alcon a little bit more because
Hmm.
I have that end-to-end perspective, right? That
Yeah.
some people in the organization or other organizations may be in one role or one department for their entire career.
Hmm.
And I've been lucky enough to kind of bounce around a little bit. So to your question about 20 years and being that bringing that excitement still in the 21 year
Hmm.
is due to it never being boring. It's not
Yeah.
monotonous. It's problems are here every day to solve, and I get excited about helping to do that and bringing my perspective and energy to whatever problem is in front of us. So
Yeah.
that's definitely there.
Yeah. I probably have a tendency to really oversimplify things sometimes when we're talking about topics like this overhaul, right? But the reason I commented on the perspective that you have, having been in so many functions of the business, is because oftentimes at the core of why these efforts get really sticky or can go wrong is it's fear, it's a lack of curiosity,
Hmm.
it's a lack of perspective,
Yeah,
it's not having a comfort level for really genuine communication, it's
yeah,
not knowing how to have some hard conversations. It's not being able to really encourage that cross-functional, like, okay, let's get it all out there. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Because there's just sometimes there's these silos, whether that's in the business or in people's minds that they just lock into. And then
yeah.
that's where these things really uh can hit, some real
Sure.
roadblocks. And I think that's why, it's a unique perspective and it helps you bring a unique skill set to the project to be
Yeah,
able to have that understanding and encourage others to do the same. Oh, hey, yeah, 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 like, just let's listen to this question or
this other
idea,
point
and
of view.
let's,
Yeah,
come from that lens of curiosity instead of like protecting.
yeah.
So anyway.
And you don't
Okay.
know what you don't know, right? People
Yeah.
that are in a role, customer service comes to mind a lot. I tell you a quick story. When I was in my operational excellence role, I would get deployed into these different operating units and say, okay, help me fix, look at this problem and see what they're doing. Or it might not even be a problem to them, just evaluate cost operational effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one group I set down a customer service role that was showing me what they do and how they place orders. And every time they placed an order, they had to hit a button that printed the order, and then they would have to go get it off of the printer and then come back and file it and then put it away in this filing cabinet. And I was asking, like, well, what do you do with that printed document? Well, I don't know. We store it, in case we need it. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have to print every time you order? Yeah, the button says print and order, and submit
Mm-hmm.
the order. So like it was that, being able to come to them and not be like, well, that's dumb, right? But you have to
Mm-hmm.
have that political savviness and
Yeah.
bedside manner to be able to be like, okay, could we do this differently and ask them to come up with the aha moment, but
Yeah.
also then be able to turn that into execution to say, well, what if we just thinking about out loud separated those and just placed an order, and then if you need to print, then you have a print button, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it saved just their steps across their office, right?
Yeah.
To go get that print to come, and then the waste of that paper and all of that, right? This was years ago. We've
Mm-hmm.
come a long way, but I just always remember that story is that, you got a customer service representative that's been there 5, 10 plus years.
Yeah.
They don't know anything different, and you have to
Yeah.
come sit beside them and guide them in that journey.
So what you just said, there's two things I want to come back to, and then I promise we're going to get back on track. One is you mentioned it might not even be a problem. And that statement made me think that a lot of times opportunities present first as problems until we've really figured them out, right? And
Yeah,
so we need to be conscious of that, right? Because if we are hesitant because a thing feels like a problem. We might not allow ourselves to get to the opportunity that's underneath that, you know. That was one thought I had. And then to your point about the um, the story, and kind of, questioning that process enough to be like, well, wait a minute. I'm so guilty of that in my day-to-day life, right? I mean, we as humans, you just sort of get into a routine, right? And
Hmm.
you do things a certain way, and it takes effort to change that, even if it's changing it for the better. And so it made me think of something. I had an event in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago, and we had sort of a think tank, and it was just a group of service leaders, and we had conversations about a number of different things. But one of the things we talked about is when we're so focused today on what can we optimize, what can we how can we innovate? And I think we so often incline to look at that as what can we change, what can we add? But it's very important to also look at, especially because there's so much change taking place in the service landscape and the business landscape today, people can get very weary, right? We also need to be thinking about what have we been doing that isn't working any longer, that doesn't
Right.
serve the needs of what our business is today, that we could take off
Yeah.
someone's plate,
Evolve,
that they're
right?
doing just because it's the process, but maybe that process needs to be updated in a way that could really streamline things and take some
Sure.
weight off, so that then when we ask them to learn this new thing, they have a little bit more space in their mind and their day
Yeah.
to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the service overhaul that Alcon has gone through over the past number of years. But before we get into what that looked like, I want to talk a bit first about sort of the catalysts that brought that to bear.
Hmm.
So one was the recognition that while service at Alcon had previously been perceived as a cost. So it was just the cost to serve.
Yeah.
There was a recognition that it could be a strategic lever. So can you talk a little bit about, how that recognition hit and what changes it sort of prompted?
Yeah. I think you hit it. Alcon's gone through a lot over those 75 years that I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. And even in the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, we've gone through different ownerships and independent companies, uh, and the focus on our customer, maybe along that journey 5, 10, 15 years ago, got lost a little bit, right? And so when you look at, the face of our organization, you could say it's the sales rep, but then, okay, hold on, what about customer service? What about technical service? What about the clinical application specialists that are with our customers every day? Are they being supported to enable that messaging to our customers of how important they are and keeping the customer at the
Hmm.
center? And so, service historically, when we started this journey, was under the manufacturing umbrella. And
Hmm.
so it's natural for manufacturing to look at, inventory yield and cost to serve, and to be able to get our products out the door at the least cost available at the highest quality available. So quality was never, the big reason why we needed to get in there. It was more around the cost was the reason we looked at that. Well, we took a different pivot of it and said, well, service should be a strategic advantage for Alcon.
Hmm.
And internally, our service operations, they were solid, but they just weren't fully aligned with our business goals. So externally, we saw more and more companies using service to stand out and to add that value. So we changed our mindset into seeing service not just as operational, but treated it as strategic.
Hmm.
And what we did from an organizational perspective is we created this global service team that was really never there before, that's set under what we call global franchise, right?
Hmm.
So we're connecting service with the global marketing brands and the global leaders that had it at a seat at the table
Hmm.
to be able to do that. So shifting from that manufacturing focus to a commercially integrated focus was key. So that was kind of the shift of why, the why behind it, and I can talk about the what if you want me to get into that.
Yeah, so we're gonna get there, but I think it's Again, it reminds me of sort of the conversation we just had, right? Which is when this was under manufacturing, no one was doing anything wrong with sort of the focus being more cost centered or the the employees themselves being, really just focused on what it was they were being asked to do, right? And so it
Sure.
comes back again of and that's part of the point I want to drive home during our conversation today, Kenny, is that, oftentimes we talk about service transformation, but in the context, and I would say increasingly in any context, but in the context of a transformation like you're sharing, it's not a service transformation. It is a business transformation, right? And
Mhm.
what that requires then is that integration of perspectives, alignment on, okay, well, wait a second, services over here in manufacturing, and we're looking at it this way. But as a business, what if we look at it a little bit differently?
Yeah.
What then does that require, right? And
Right.
so then it becomes, a business transformation, conversation and project, not just a service. Service transformation would be like, okay, we're going to really drill down on improving efficiency by 5% in our existing sort of
Mhm.
ethos and processes, right? That's, you're changing something within the existing structure and perspective. What you're talking about is really this recognition of, okay, we see other brands looking at service as a strategic lever. Let's think about how Alcon could benefit from doing the same. And then what does that require of us? And so we're going to get into that next. But the other catalyst, and you alluded to it, is that you started going back to the customer and you started thinking, okay, well, have we maybe lost sight a bit? And that obviously doesn't mean your customers aren't important. It means that you are focusing on these operational things or these ownership things or whatever that is, right? So
Right.
you come back to CSAT, customer experience, and you dig in more there to, I would imagine, sort of validate your thinking about the service opportunity, but also to really understand what do we need to do to benefit them. And the
Yeah.
part that you shared with me that I would like you to share with the listeners is how you partnered with Disney on this, which I just think is really cool. So, can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that sort of customer side catalyst and what you learned in that process?
Yeah, it was a game changer, really. I mean, the it to your point, it didn't start with a service transformation, it was a business transformation. At that time, we actually created a group at Alcon called Customer Experience.
Hmm.
And they were the champions to partner with Disney, but bringing them in as a consultant arm to just evaluate how we're doing things versus, how Disney does things. And, they're best in class in that customer experience. So it was a natural partnership in gathering kind of what they see as Alcon versus that maturity scale, and where they think we need to go. There was really two big takeaways from that work. One was the employee engagement. Disney treats their employees as cast members, right? They
Hmm.
all have essential parts of the customer journey. So we had to embrace that mindset and invest in training and development to make sure teams were not just skilled at their operational task or their technical task, but they were motivated and aligned with the customer first mission.
Hmm.
And then the second big takeaway was creating a common purpose. Working to build a shared vision across the company, from engineers to executives, right? Everybody needed to understand their role in delivering that great experience, right?
Hmm.
And we were able to do that early on by doing sort of a world tour, right? We didn't just sit in Fort Worth at our headquarters or in Switzerland. We went out to the market. We went out to different regions and sat with them and asked them what's working well, what's not. Got that shared voice, consolidated all of that, and brought those two big pillars of employee engagement and common purpose back
Hmm.
to them. So they felt
Hmm.
connected. Now they're part of the mission. They're part of the cast, and that really connected.
Yeah. You know, I love two things. One is this idea of something to anchor to. And in this example, that purpose is important, not only because I think most people want to feel that they're serving a purpose when they come to work, right? But also because when you're talking about change and approach, right? Again, like I mentioned, it isn't that anyone was doing anything wrong before. They were doing what they had interpreted or been told was the purpose. So if the purpose is changing, how do we create something that we can anchor into that helps create that shared vision and helps people understand why we're doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
And then I absolutely love that the learning coming out of that is that the the first focus needed to be the employees, because when you talk about customer centricity, what can happen is that people skip to the benefit and the outcome they're trying to drive with customer experience and overlook the criticality of, well, if we're not treating our employees well, if they don't feel valued, if they don't feel heard, if they're not bought into our purpose, if they're not
Hmm.
trained and compensated and cared for appropriately, we're never going to do what we're aiming to do anyway.
Right.
It sounds so simple. Like sometimes I'm like, people probably listen to the podcast and they're like, no kidding. But I say it because of how often it's done wrong,
Yeah.
and so it is an important point to underscore.
Yeah. These things,
So
to that point, Sarah,
yeah.
these concepts and discussions aren't that complicated, but they are difficult to
Hmm.
execute,
That's what
right?
it is. Yes.
Human element is, kind of the core of it all, an underlying variable in the
Yeah.
mix. And you got different personalities and different cultures and different, ways of people learn and adapt to the messaging. So you have to, be aware of all of those elements as you're delivering kind of the vision and then
Yeah.
going to take that vision to execution.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because, I've been covering this space or creating content in this space for, I mean, a long time, 17 years or something. And, every year in the end of December, it's like, what are your predictions for next year? What's the next big thing? And I'm
Mhm.
like, it's not about the next big thing, really. Like, everyone needs to pay attention, but it's about the nuance. It's about
Mhm.
those layers of complexity with really what mostly already exists. It's
Mhm.
about, this evolution and, this continuous cycle of, these things. And so, yeah, you're right to state kind of the punchline logically. Yeah, it sounds simple. In reality, and this is why I'm so passionate about what I do, because you know, because you're doing it, that it is not anywhere near as easy as it sounds, right? And so that's why there are so many areas where things typically
Yeah,
go astray, because that's
sure.
where like the real stuff comes into play of like, well, on paper, we had this plan and it sounded great. And then in reality, we have to deal with all of these human beings and
Yeah,
employees, customers, all of it. And
yeah,
then things got really sticky, So
yeah.
yeah. Okay, so we understand, Alcon understands this opportunity that lies within in service and overhauling it. Let's talk a little bit about what went into it. So the what. So I'm just going to kind of go through my
Mhm.
my bullets, and you can comment on whatever you want to. We talked
Sure.
about global standardization and creating some consistency. We talked about the change in organizational structure. We talked about measurement systems,
Hmm.
P&L, and then the technology piece. So I'll
Yeah,
let you kind of take it and just talk a bit about, okay, once we knew there was an opportunity, here's how we made
sure.
changes.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the standardization piece. I think you referenced earlier, you take bits and pieces of your own life, and just thinking about my experiences, a couple of companies that always stick out to me, Starbucks and McDonald's. And if you go to any Starbucks anywhere in the world, um, it's going to look and feel the same. The coffee really doesn't even taste different, that much different
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
you're in India or in Europe or in South America or in Fort Worth, Texas, right? And that always stuck out to me is like, how do they do it where, you walk in and it doesn't really feel any different, right?
Hmm.
And the same with McDonald's. When you go to a medical device company and you're, a global brand, and you go from operating office to operating office, commercial office to commercial office, it's not to that maturity scale.
Hmm.
I mean, our products are the same, right?
Right.
The way we use them should be the same, but the way we train might be different, and the way we operationalize those practices may be a little different. And so creating that standardization was key to really deliver, and that goes hand in hand with the measurement systems, is to say, well, how are we measuring ourselves? If we're measuring ourselves the same, then, we can adapt that global standardization a lot quickly. I've always been under the kind of vernacular and the messaging of, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
Hmm.
So that measurement system is very, very key. And when we were under manufacturing, when service was under manufacturing, that measurement system was a lot different. So we had to
Hmm.
pull out the profit and loss metrics to start. What is the revenue for service? What is the cost for service? And build that from scratch.
Yeah.
And then you take all the operational metrics to keep your cost at a minimum. And you look at your strategic levers around profit through service contracts and billable goods, and you look at bringing that value proposition through the table, and all that is included in your measurement system.
Hmm.
And then if you talk about technology, one of the things that we is going to continuously be an evolution in this space is our service management system and our ERP systems.
Hmm.
And when we started the service transformation, we were on very fragmented ERP systems. And so now we have a global, instance of both of those.
Hmm.
And, we can always do better, and we are always doing better to integrate that and make that least burdensome for the field service engineers as possible, as that's part of their responsibility, is to track the instance and to update all of the information about the customer visit and the asset and all of those things. Those aren't always looked at as something that the engineer wants to do.
Hmm.
We hire field service engineers because they're really good at fixing machines and
Hmm.
being technology experts or network experts, or things of that nature, not because they're the best at entering data into
Hmm.
a user interface. That's their least fun part of their job. So
Hmm.
we need to automate that, and we'll talk about a little bit things we're doing to help there in the evolution of service going forward. But that's
Hmm.
always been a pillar of ours. So it's really around, like you said, standardization, building those proper measurement systems to point to the right levels of measurement to improve, and then continuously focusing on technology.
Yeah, I love that. I want to go back to the point about measurement, because this is another area where I see companies create a bit of a disconnect, right? And it can happen for a number of different reasons. But what can happen is, Alcon had this recognition of, okay, well, service has kind of been this cost center for us, and we want to shift and look at it as a strategic lever, right? So what can happen is some of those decisions start to get made without measurement really changing. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, and then you have a shift in strategy, but you're really not aligning how you're driving behaviors. And or you can also have companies that just want it all. Okay. Like they want to improve customer experience. And we talked about the criticality of employee experience in that, but they also don't want to sacrifice a reduction in cost savings or efficiency, right? Like so, and it's not always possible to have it all, right? And so
Sure.
this is where it comes back to the fact that it isn't about service transformation, it's about business transformation. Because if everyone isn't in agreement of here's what we think our strategy should be, but also here's how we're going to measure our success, and let's kind of work that back enough to understand, if you take field service specifically, if we're measuring our technicians on X, Y, and Z, what behaviors is that going to drive? Or where are we
Yeah.
placing friction on them of
Sure.
our unrealistic expectations of being able to kind of do everything at one time? So it's
Yeah.
a really important piece of this overall alignment for companies to work through and to land on, what everyone agrees is best, because otherwise, it can be a real sticking point in
Yeah.
somewhere in the landscape. So
Yeah.
um really good points. Now that's a whole lot of change that came up, and so we're changing processes, we're changing technology, we're changing how people are
Mm.
measured, we're changing the organizational structure, a lot of change.
Yeah.
How did you manage that change?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, coming in it from the journey that I mentioned before of getting it into a global franchise role and starting to collect and consolidate all of the opportunities and then prioritizing and putting all that in place, that, was pretty straightforward. It, like we said, it wasn't easy, but it was at least you could tell step one, two, three, four. But then when it came to, okay, now we're time to execute some of these changes that you've told us are important, it became, well, it's just a matter of scale. Like one person or even two or three people can't do that to a global company operating in, 60 different countries, right?
Hmm.
So we recognized we needed sort of this center of excellence and community. And what we did is justified this role at Alcon called a regional process owner.
Hmm.
So in every region, we work in Europe, we work in Asia, we work in South America, obviously US,
Hmm.
Japan, et cetera. Those regions operate as their own, entities, if you
Hmm.
would, and we needed to build those things, those groups together. And so we were able to kind of elaborate on what this role could do
Hmm.
to bring that voice of change and to embed this change and get it adopted all the way down to the engineer level.
Hmm.
So it didn't become just so top down of, hey,
Hmm.
here's what Kenny has to say, right? And go and do
Hmm.
it. But it was collaborative and it was both ways. It was collecting that demand, collecting the voice of the customer. But then as we were able to solve things and build the global scale, now it's coming back to the regional process owner. And that role was then, knighted to go and be the change advocates to go get it
Hmm.
done.
Hmm.
And that wasn't an easy sell, to be honest, because as you know, in commercial organizations, if you're not hiring sales reps, then there's a lot of scrutiny on why are we asking for more headcount.
Hmm.
And so it needed one region to kind of step up and be the leader here and say, okay, I see what you're saying, Kenny, we need this. And then after we built it and they started using it, we used that market to say, look, this is the most important role I've ever had. And
Hmm.
they were saying that. And
Hmm.
they were telling their other regional colleagues, you need this role to be successful. And now I'm proud to say we have regional process owners in every single region.
Hmm.
But that took a couple of years to actually justify through budgeting cycles, because at first it was like, no, we're not adding a headcount, right?
Hmm.
Um, but then after it got, in place and you could see what it was doing, then it was like, okay, we all need this. And
Yeah.
it's a really strategic initiative for us to have that role in place to do change adoption. And outside of service, now we're trying to model that same concept.
Yeah. And I think, it underscores that there really is no shortcut of how to drive that adoption,
Yeah.
and so you do have to figure out how to make those investments, how to take the time, how to have the headcount, whatever that looks like for any given organization. Like
Yeah.
it's just been proven over and over and over again that like you can't just skip it. Like it's not going to work without it, right? And so whatever that looks like for anyone's specific business, could be different, but the
Hmm.
necessity of it is certainly universal.
Yeah.
Now, looking back, what would you share as the biggest lesson learned in this sort of service overhaul slash business transformation?
I think we covered that, Sarah, but I'll just reiterate that it's the strategic lever of standardization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Shifting our perspectives to seeing not only service as a cost center, but recognizing it for the drivers of customer value and business growth, and integrating that into our commercial operations. I think those
Mm-hmm.
those things right there is the biggest lesson about any of this is to yeah, look at it from a different lens.
Yeah.
And when we establish that consistency in the standards, then everything else kind of followed in place, and we'll continue to improve our overall service delivery.
Mm-hmm. And so you alluded to, one of the things that's kind of coming next. And so, the way I think about what we just spoke about is, you saw this opportunity, right, to really transform how service was perceived within Alcon and ultimately how it's approached and executed.
Yeah.
And all of those changes you made to bring that to life are this foundation from which now you have this consistency, you have these common systems, you have these process owners, you have this two-way communication, you have a really good, strong foundation built,
Yeah.
but you don't just like kick your feet up and,
Yeah. Now it's easy.
yeah,
Now
it's
we're
it's
done.
not it's never over, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, now it becomes, and I say that because sometimes companies don't have that strong of a foundation and they're saying, well, what do we do with AI and how do we do this? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I mean, if you don't have something solid to work from, you probably need to go back and start there because these things are meant to complement and
Yeah.
refine and advance. They're not a magic wand for doing that hard work that Alcon did,
Yeah.
right? But now that you're at this point of having that foundation built, you're looking at, okay, so what is next, right?
Yeah.
And so we talked about how part of that is around Gen AI. So can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about, how you think Gen AI is going to sort of, take this to the next level?
Yeah, I'd love to say that the heavy lifting is behind us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the next chapter is going to be just, I want to say harder, but it'll be definitely a different type of work
Mm-hmm.
than the work we described in the journey so far. The way I see it is kind of in four different buckets, Sarah. One is we need to be able to create smarter customer interactions to
Mm-hmm.
personalize that touch. So we have a lot of data around our customer, right? We have customer relationship management systems and service management systems. The data is all out there around what the customer is needing, what their previously experiences were, and trying to tailor that recommendation now to create that integrated and engaging experience is one place that I think Gen AI can really
Mm-hmm.
help expedite that kind of lever. The second is more of a proactive service versus a reactive. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
wait for the customer to call us and say, "Hey, this thing is down. Can you help get my laser back up and running?" We want to look at issues before they pop up and to look at,
Mm-hmm.
well, what are those trends that could create that potential downtime, and just ultimately prevent less downtime and more customer satisfaction. So that's
Mm-hmm.
getting data from our devices directly, and then feeding that through a rules-based approach that can produce it back to the action takers,
Mm-hmm.
or produce it back right into the equipment. That's kind of the second piece. The
Mm-hmm.
third is more, I don't know if we call it Gen AI more than traditional AI, but automating those routine tasks,
Mm-hmm.
right? Freeing up the team to focus on more complex and high valued work. I mentioned earlier that the engineer's least favorite thing about their job is entering information into their service management system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So are there things that we can say, oh, that's just, you did that already. It's going to, automate that task for
Yeah.
them. And then last is really around deeper insights, creating that advanced analytics to spot those trends, optimize those processes, and make smarter decisions faster.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of the four areas I would see as game changers for Gen AI. And we're actively working in those spaces to take service to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I had a thought when you were saying, I wish I could say the hard work was done, but this next phase is going to be just as daunting, or just as significant, right?
Mhm.
And absolutely. I think though it makes me think of, I guess, and you have the benefit of having 21 years of history within the business, but you also have the benefit now of like going through this. And so
Mhm.
there's something about knowing it can be done and knowing, not only that it can be done, but that you've had success doing it, and also that you are now emboldened with all of the things you learned through
Mhm.
that first time, right? But the other piece of this, it reminds me, I think it was the second podcast I ever recorded, and this is probably like 318, so it was a long time ago. But it was a gentleman named Greg Lush who worked at the time at MCOR, and our conversation was around this idea of digital reputation. And that every time a company, and I know we're not only talking about technology and digital kind of, lends itself to that, but the concept
Hmm.
is the same, which is when a company can do what Alcon has done and, you know, maybe not execute this perfectly because is that ever even a possibility, right? But to do it with intent and care
Hmm.
and, thoughtfulness, right?
Hmm.
The experience that creates for everyone who is a part of that transformation gives them a belief for the next time and the next phase, right? So you've built a positive, we'll say digital reputation, because that's the term I'm referencing. And that it's a really good thing. And I think also for companies that maybe have gone through a significant transformation like what we've discussed that haven't done such a good job, having a reputation that isn't as good is also a very important consideration because you're not
Hmm.
starting from level ground. You're starting from a little bit more resistance and being conscious of that and thinking about how you overcome that. Or in your case, knowing that, okay, we've done this once, we learned a lot, we succeeded. We're going to rally around that,
Yeah.
for these next phases. Because, I was just on a customer group community session yesterday, and we were talking a lot about change and change management. And one person was just very honest and said, I just feel so overwhelmed, and it's like, yep.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's okay. And that's, it's going to happen, right? But you have to figure out then what can I turn to as sort of fuel and as
Yeah.
evidence and as, to keep the resilience, to keep the energy up, to keep people positive, et cetera.
Yeah.
So um, now around AI, we talked about the importance of governance and effective communication. How are you working on that as you kind of
Yeah.
take these next steps?
Yeah, so I probably should have mentioned it. I know we were talking about about Kenny at the very beginning and the the current title and confusing title and all that. I got even more to add to the title. So just recently I've been asked to lead our Gen AI go to market, and
Mm-hmm.
that idea of go to market is really for the enterprise, not necessarily for our external customers at this point in time, but how
Mm-hmm.
do we bring Gen AI to life at Alcon? We have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
strong pilots and use cases and things that are already offering value. But to your point, it's, in a company of 25,000 people, it can not, all feel connected and could feel fragmented at times.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working to lead that and then to deploy it. And, bringing those experiences from service into this work are going to be key.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think to start in that AI journey, you got to start with governance,
Mm-hmm.
building that framework of governance that clearly defines who's responsible for what, but also does it in a safe and ethical way that's aligned to our values, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have a dedicated, responsible AI team that oversees this. And so ensuring that they are in the center of any new innovation that we do, building that framework and those parameters around what we do and what we don't do.
Mm-hmm.
The second is start small but learn fast. I'll put
Mm-hmm.
it that way. We have some pilot projects in very focused areas. We want to test those and learn from those and refine them and build up scale from there, right? If
Mm-hmm.
we go tackle every single idea and problem that are out there, it won't build that experience enough to then build that advocacy and get it going. I talked a little bit about ownership, but I want to talk about value tracking as the third piece is, ensuring that we track all of these, and do that in a way we can monitor the return on our investment to
Mm-hmm.
build that excitement to our leadership to continue to get investment in this space, and ultimately to return the value back to our business.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth area I'll say is to use that RPO network idea and to use it for Gen AI to build that community of super users and best
Mm-hmm.
practice in the regions. Probably not there yet, but we're probably, as we get more of the structure there, we'll be building something out and hopefully just using some of the same resources that are going to help us innovate and bring that. And then last is strong communication. We need to build robust communication plan with regular updates, giving people tips and tricks, and here's what's coming, or here's what's already here. Have you tried this? Keeping everybody informed and engaged in a creative way. But yeah, it can be overwhelming. You don't want to also turn that communication into spam where people just disregard it after a while
Mm-hmm.
either. You want to make it useful and relevant. So, communication is going to be a big lever for us to focus on as we kind of continue this journey.
Yeah. What about communication in the context of like, I think AI is something that can create some fear among employees that
Sure.
question, like, am I going to have a job in 3 years? That
Yeah.
sort of thing. And, to some degree, none of us can predict the future at this
Yeah.
point. But how are you sort of navigating the idea of, kind of going back to managing that change, making people feel that, you're being as transparent as you can for the moment, and you are helping them understand the role they'll play, et cetera. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been kind of using this quote with some of our first discussions in this area around Gen AI won't take your job, but those that know how to use Gen AI will,
Hmm.
right? Probably heard that before. And the idea is that we need to help people see the use cases of this and to see how it can help them.
Hmm.
I gotta admit, at first when I saw Open AI and ChatGPT and started using it, I was amazed. But then I was like, well, what kind of data? Where's my data going, and how do I do this?
Hmm.
Can I do this for my work and give it, sensitive business data in there? And so now we've learned a lot over the last, 18 to 24 months in this space that we can answer those questions and to knock down that fear level,
Hmm.
and let people come with their concerns and say, okay, here's how we're handling that. Here's what you
Hmm.
don't do. Here's what you do do. And that you see the guard coming down a lot more because they're like, oh, I could use that for
Hmm.
what I'm trying to do. I can organize my notes and I can, find things better, and I can create actions and agents. And so now that they're leaning in because we have
Hmm.
really strong use cases that are relevant to the individuals we're talking to. When you're
Hmm.
talking in just theory of Gen AI and it's going to change the world, and then they start thinking of movies like iRobot, and the robot's going to
Hmm.
come and take over, right? But
Yeah.
then you make it applicable to their life, and now they're like, okay, I'm in. I want to do
Hmm.
this. I want some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kenny, last question is, you've been at Alcon 21 years. We talked about the service overhaul. We're talking about what's coming next, but there was a lot before that too, right? You've been through a lot of different sort of phases of the company's journey, but also your own journey as a leader. And I'm just curious, if you think about like, um, what is one quality of leadership today in our present landscape that you feel is so, so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if I think about what we need to do at Alcon is to stay strong on our pillar, especially in our surgical space of our Alcon Vision Suite. And
Hmm.
what that means is we have three pillars of that. We have our best products in the market. We have the best service organization out there. We take care of our customers, and we have cutting edge digital innovation. Those
Hmm.
three areas, right? And so I think we need to stay focused on that as we cast our vision, and what makes the leader, more advanced in the future is to not lose focus on our patients and our doctors and their staff, right?
Hmm.
If we lose focus on that and get sidetracked with the shiny penny of, technology and what it can do, we're in trouble. Now, can we use
Hmm.
the technology and innovation and all of these things to enable us in that area of digital transformation, and raising up the use of AI and the culture that we aspire to have? 1,000% yes. But we need to be
Hmm.
agile, we need to be tech savvy, and we need to be forward thinking in that way, and just staying ahead of the curve. And if we do that with our patients and our doctors and their staff in mind, then nothing's going to stand in our way.
Hmm. Good. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing a whole lot of wonderful insights on these things. And would love to have you back at some point and talk about how these next phases are coming along. So appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. It was a pleasure and appreciate you having me today.
Absolutely. You can learn more by visiting the home of the Unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.